Welcome to episode 74 of the Football Fitness Federation podcast. I'm delighted today to be joined by Tom Williams, who is the head of S&C at Toronto FC. Tom, how's things?
Good, thank you. Dealing with a difficult situation, but good in the circumstances.
Yeah, it's a bit of a crazy time at the moment, mate, isn't it? And we're going to obviously dive into that today. But what I wanted to kick off with, I've just mentioned your role, obviously over the pond at the moment, but not always been over there. So do you want to take us through your career so far, where you've been, the roles you've had, the clubs you've been at so far?
Yeah, definitely. I think I fall into the same boat as many people in my position or in the sports science industry that kind of a failed footballer turned into what it was called as the fitness coach back in the day, and now obviously titles and things have changed there. But didn't make it as a football player. Ended up going to Loughborough University to do my undergrad, sport and exercise science. During my time there, I thought my path was going to be on the coaching side, as a technical coach. So I ended up taking positions with academy teams around the East Midlands of Derby County, Nottingham Forest, coaching some of their junior academy teams, as well as helping out with the goalkeepers. So a pretty broad introduction into where I potentially saw myself going, and that was all during my time at Loughborough University. From then, I moved into a part-time role with Mansfield Town when they were in the conference as the fitness coach, and the fitness coach then was the person who would kind of do everything, right? I was the cone picker-upper, I was the assistant coach, I was a performance analyst, I was helping the kit man, and it was definitely a baptism of fire for me, going from an academy perspective, dealing with pretty talented young players, and having really nice facilities, to going into a conference team full of first team players who have been at that level or been at a higher level, and then me thinking I knew exactly what to do with them, which definitely wasn't the case. So thrown in the deep end there at Mansfield Town, and the head coach was David Holsworth, and my first day, he said to me, he goes, right, so pre-season, over to you. I was like, oh, okay, perfect, let's go. So it was definitely guided discovery on my part there, trying to deal with that situation. But it was a huge learning curve for me in my career, and definitely put me on the path to wanting to be in the sports science performance industry. From there, I moved into a rehabilitation role with Sheffield United. They were in the championship at the time, worked under Dean Riddle there, who's now at Seattle Seahawks. So I spent 4 years with Sheffield United working with the first team, specifically on the rehab side, before moving down to Leicester City to oversee the strength conditioning with the academy players, 9s all the way through to 23s, under Kevin Paxton, before I had the call to come out and work with Toronto FC in the MLS as head of strength conditioning there. So a few different ups and downs, potential career paths changing, but I think it all kind of comes together and gives me a little bit of a good idea as to the collective development across football.
We've had a little chat off air just before we started recording about the sort of current situation. So we're recording with the sort of 3rd of April at the moment. Obviously, coronavirus is spreading worldwide. We've got certain areas of the world in isolation, certain areas in the world that are gradually recovering from being hit with the virus, other areas that are being hit like it's a fresh thing in certain areas. So just take us through, Tom, the current situation at the club, or even in the country, to be fair, and how that's affecting what your role is and what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. I think there's so many people in the same boat here, and I've heard a lot of talk about it. But from a perspective of working in the MLS, right, we span 2 countries, right? We work with the US and Canada, and within that, there are obviously different provincial state rules that that are coming into play, with certain areas becoming hotspots for the virus when other areas aren't really affected at all. So it makes planning pretty difficult, as we have to follow governmental rules and how that fits in with us training the players. So for those of you who don't know, with the MLS, we work from March through November. That's our general season. We have the winter months off. So we were 2 games into the league. So we finished the preseason period, then moved into playing 2 regular season games, and then we got hit with a league suspension, which is pretty difficult to take, given all the work we've put in over a preseason period to get to that point. So it makes it difficult then, knowing that we have a whole season that we need to get going in a condensed amount of time. And I think a lot depends on how long this goes on for. If we're talking 8 weeks, 12 weeks, even longer, puts a lot of players in this position, and staff as well, into really difficult situations. One, from a health standpoint, most importantly. Then you start talking about how people are potentially losing jobs, which makes that a very, very difficult situation, a very sensitive situation. I know some coaches in the MLS who work on part-time contracts. Then it's difficult to see how that pans out on a larger scale, in terms of dealing with this outbreak. From our perspective, it's something we had to do. Is we had to figure out how we're going to get this thing going as soon as possible, so we can have a plan for the players at hand. So our league was suspended on March 12th. So that was a Thursday, and basically figured out, right, this break in the season could go on for up to 8 weeks. Let's plan out for a potential 8-week period where the players are going to be in isolation for the worst case scenario. And obviously with our team, we have so many different players with different cultural backgrounds, with different training ages, that have families, live on their own, live in condo buildings, live in houses. So there's all these things that we have to try and figure out and factor in how we can engage the athletes, and put something in place to have like a progressive physical program. So on that, like I said, we kind of built out a calendar, struck a deal with Peloton pretty early on. So all the players had bikes, treadmills sent out to them, again, preparing for a worst case situation where we'd be on full lockdown and players can't leave. And we grouped our players on specific needs, like I just said then, cultural background, training age, and had our staff members deliver content through Zoom. And I think Zoom has been a huge asset to the sports science and medical industry this past couple of months. I'm surprised I haven't started charging yet on a large scale to get this set up, but it's something great where we get to engage, interact with our athletes, and kind of bring that social side to it. I think I was saying to Ben at the start that it's really easy to look at it like an off season where you can just send players out a program, right? Here's some strength exercises, here's some running exercises. But the fact is, if you're stuck at home and you live in a apartment building on your own, that social interaction is something that's so valued. You can't go out and walk down the street anymore. You can't see your friends. Everything ends up being video call. So why not? And I know this is where it is now, is to put something in place where that athlete engagement is paramount to your program, rather than taking the fitness element or the sports science medical element and making that the forefront. We should take a step back and go, you know what, we need to make sure that all these people in our club and our organization are happy, right? From a psychological well-being, they see each other, they can talk, they can have banter, and then let's layer in some content behind that. So that's basically how we started off dealing with this situation.
Yeah, it's a crazy one, isn't it? Zoom will definitely be utilised by many clubs out there. And I saw the great clip of I think it's Mourinho and the Spurs team the other day, all training at the same time. I think that's the norm, isn't it? That's the way it's going to be right now. What do you think of? Obviously, we all work with players, and throughout a squad, we're going to have different personalities. Some players that will just crack on, they'll do a program really well. Others that will need guidance right the way through a program. But what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced in terms of keeping that engagement with players and just making sure that the right work's being done?
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to my point of having players split into groups with a specific member of our sports science and medical staff allocated to those groups where they have a strong relationship with those players. Like we have a contingent of South American, European players where English is their second language, and we're lucky enough to have a massage therapist with us who is Uruguayan, fluent in Spanish. So having that side of it, you can have so much more interaction with the players on a personal level if they're split into small groups, rather than trying to throw everyone in together and then one player's not understanding what's going on, not understanding the situation as to what's happening. You can definitely have more of a laser guided missile approach to the physical development and social interaction with the players if they are in small groups. And again, you need to try and give them a little bit of respect in the fact that they're not young academy players and they need to be able to make decisions for themselves. And having Zoom calls every day and make sure they're all on and having this kind of regimented structure, it's difficult for players who have been playing for years and years and years and years. So you have to have some sort of trust that players are going to be responsible and respectful of the situation and be able to kind of continue to build on their physical development in this time and engage as much as possible, even if that's not on a Zoom call, if that's just through text messaging, if that's through personal calls, to allow that freedom and give them some responsibility. But I feel it all comes from like a layered approach where you can potentially go, right, this is the situation, this is we're all working through. We're going to get on Zoom, we're going to take you through some circuits, we're going to give you some strength exercises, some running exercises. Like I said, the guys have pelotons, so there's an array of different equipment and different physical stimulus that they can have. But if you start in the fact that we get everyone on the same page or everyone's reading the same book, then we can break off into those, specific areas of cultural background, training age, and then allowing for that individual response to come through. I think that's probably one of the biggest things we've had to deal with, and I think the performance community are dealing with very, very similar situations, right? Where you're gonna panic on reductions in strength, in fitness, in not hitting certain metrics that I want to get to. But I feel like that's kind of potential background noise, because we need to take a look at it and go, if people are in their houses all day, this isn't going to happen. So how are we going to engage them in a different way to really, really affect them and make sure they can come back in some sort of physical shape to help the team out and help us be successful? And like we said before we started, I think there's so many different teams in different situations where there's a lot on the line. Like back in the UK, teams who are vying for promotion, going into the playoffs, teams fighting relegation in cup tournaments. There's a lot hinging on how your players show up when they come back from this break. So again, the pressure is on there to try and get something delivered in the worst case scenario, but at the same time, you have to walk that tightrope of looking what is actually feasible and beneficial for these guys at this time, so they can come back and, like I said, help your team be successful.
With that, we've got to understand that everyone's in the same boat as well, don't we? That all players are in the same sort of scenario, and yeah, some might have gyms or they might have a bit more space or whatever it is, but at the same time, with a lot, especially in the UK right now, we're all in the same boat. I think it'd be good to sort of dive in, because obviously we're at the different end of the season to you guys. You guys have gone through a whole pre-season period. Obviously, I think you said you played 2 league games, was it? And then the season gets suspended. So, like, mindset from your point of view, it must have been a really tough task, because you've gone through this really structured program, got the players in a good position, and then suddenly that becomes not a waste, but it's something that's going to need working on again, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely a setback because we had a really, really good preseason, and we came in with some pretty decent results. We had a point on the road at San Jose and a win at New York City. So we had a bit of momentum. Say momentum, was only 2 games, but having built some pretty good physical development through preseason, we get into this. Now you have this lull in performance, right, and training. So it's definitely difficult to put it in place. But like I said, being as innovative as possible in this time is key, because we have to maintain engagement from these players. And things we've layered in to the content, like I said earlier, when we had the initial program, it was pretty basic. We had Zoom calls, we had circuits and all the equipment sent out. But then each week this has continued. We've added more layers onto it, so the players feel there's a little bit more, rather than bombarding them from day one with all this information, all this content, and all this stuff. We've kind of periodically layered it into the program. So that's for example, going out and getting all their players care packages, all our staff care packages that would have mini bands, rubber bands, dumbbells, supplements, shakers. Players are inside all the time, so they're getting multivitamins, vitamin D, supplements. And layering this into our content is something that I feel adds a little bit more content and context to the situation as we move forward. And we were getting players their catapult, their GPS, individual chargers, setting them up on the Vector app where they can share information. If certain guys are going out running, if guys are on treadmill, we can potentially keep some sort of log on what's happening, as well as when we're looking to plan future weeks and add in physical content, we have a potential benchmark of what guys have been doing and where they've been at, plus if they've been doing it. So we can keep an eye on compliance, as well as scheduling our Zoom calls for our circuit strength development. And something moving forward, we've even thought adding in something from a non-physical side to try and aid a little bit of stimulation, where we try and get that cognitive development. So having games like group Uno games or dominoes, card games, building towers, even just hanging out in the afternoon, having coffee and talking. Because some players, we have players out of college who are 18, 19 years old, or young academy players, young pros, where they're living on their own all day, every day. So just having that little bit of social interaction, it goes such a long way. So adding those in the afternoons, to one, it engages them differently, but it also gives them some sort of routine, because we're all creatures of routine and habit, and we want to have that consistent what's next. And I feel like from our perspective, layering this in on a weekly basis is something that's been pretty successful so far.
It's like a lot of businesses will be tackling at the moment, isn't it? Like a lot of people working from home, but at the same time, we've got to have the break away from work, and there's got to be that social side. It's something that really is lacking. And if we set up in a nice house and we're surrounded by in the countryside or whatever, then okay, that might be fine. But if we're in an apartment by ourselves, and it can get quite lonely, can't it? So yeah, the social side is something that's massive, isn't it? And I bet there's some pretty cool stuff being done at the moment, or I hope there is, by clubs to sort of keep those players engaged. I think it also sort of defines the importance of us seeing people every day, doesn't it? Like when we're at the training ground with fellow professionals and coaches and all the rest of it, we probably take that for granted, that the social side of football is huge, and it's what ex-pros talk about a lot, isn't it? When they come out the game, that they miss that banter and they miss like being around the lads, and that's essentially what we're having to replace at the moment.
Definitely, I 100% agree with that. And like I said, when we split our guys into these small groups, the staff members, we're lucky. We have a fantastic sports science and medical staff who are very engaged with the athletes and can relate to them on an individual level. So from our perspective, adding those guys into smaller groups is something that's been really, really beneficial, and aiding that, social, psychological, cognitive development and just interaction with the guys. It goes unnoticed so much. If you think the times where you're out working in the gym and there's banter flying around, you're interacting with players, you're coaching, people are smiling, all that's gone, right? And that's what I mean. You take that for granted, and as much as you can do it in different situations through Zoom or through call or through text, it's so important at this time to try and keep that a fundamental part of our program during this outbreak.
No, definitely. And I'm going to take you to the sort of ideal at the moment scenario, Tom, in terms of, so if we jump forward ahead of time, we get the green light, we get the sort of announcement that, yeah, the league's starting again. And obviously we can talk around timescales, because we hope that leagues give a decent amount of time to sort of recondition. But at the same time, like in terms of fitting games in, it might not be an ideal length of time. So what's your sort of mindset going into that? What's your approach, and how are you thinking about that right now?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I'm sure a lot of practitioners around the world are kind of racking their brains thinking how they're going to deal with that. I think the longer this goes on, the harder it's going to be to get the guys back into a position where they're able to just jump back in. Like from a European standpoint, there's maybe 9 games left of the season where it may be congested, it may not. It depends how that comes out. But from an MLS standpoint, we've played 2 games into a 34-game season, so that ends up being a congested season. And people talk about congested periods throughout the season. Our season ends up being just a congested season where we're looking at dealing with multiple games in a week, which is something that is a regular occurrence, right, across the Championship, League One, League Two. But then if you put into a North American standpoint where we have to cross multiple time zones, we have to be on aircraft for, between an hour and a half to 5 hours at a time. You're playing on different surfaces, different environments. Plus we have a cap on our squads. We have a roster cap where we can only have 30 players signed, a salary cap added onto that. So there's a lot of constraints that come with it. And I think if you look at things in the worst case scenario where that's actually going to happen. So during this point now, we need to condition our players' mindsets to be like, hey, this is going to be a really tough go when we get back into this. So be expected that you need to be in a position to be able to compete and play in numerous games to help the team out. Obviously, from our standpoint, it's trying to do that in the safest possible way, so we're not putting guys in situations where they're going to get injured, but also due to the salary cap constraints that come with the league, your best players win you games, right? It's kind of a no-brainer there. So when we're talking about when we get into this congested season, if you will, that we have to be smart and we have to be tactful as to how rotation occurs and when we can communicate with the coaches when players need to be rested or when young players can come in and play certain games. So there's so many moving parts into the situation rather than the physical side. As I've said before, that mindset is huge, that these guys understand that this is the case that's going to happen. You need to be able to be in a position to deal with it, and also us putting guys in a situation where they're going to be successful.
It is going to be a case of adaptation, isn't it? Because we don't know what is going to be revealed. We don't know in terms of time. We don't know in terms of like the plan going forward. And we hope that they do take certain elements into consideration and the right people consulted on it. But worst case scenario, that it could work out really tough. So what's the sort of backup plan for that? Like, is it a case of planning for worst case scenario, or is it a case of having a few different ideas in your mind and then just adapting when the announcement's made?
Yeah, I think it's all of those things. To be honest, I think if anything from this outbreak has taught us, it's how to be innovative, right? So we can deal with different situations and come up with different content. And I see some some fantastic things that are happening on social media where coaches are putting together different types of programs or different engagement ideas for players. So looking at that, we're actually dealing with worst case scenario right now. So all we need to do is just continue that mindset going forth, and add that into our plans as to this is what we've dealt with already, and basically it's going to continue. It's just going to morph a little bit into the training plan, and we just need to be open-eyed and ready for every situation that comes across. And like I said, we're lucky here that we have a really good infrastructure around the team. We have a great sports science staff, great coaching staff. We have a lot of support from our ownership group as to putting things in place and really looking to get the best of our players. So when we hit the ground, we're hitting the ground running, and we're having the best possible situation for these guys to come in and make a difference.
If you could plan that period, Tom, in terms of length of time, obviously the ideal would be we're in control of it and we can set the program in terms of length of time. What would you be looking at? Would you be looking at like just a pre-season period and picking players up from that position, or like how would you approach that? Obviously this is something that's out of our control, but I think it's just good to chat through.
Yeah, I think it's I think it all depends on how long it goes on, right? That the longer these guys are in isolation, the harder it's going to be to pick them up and get them going again. But yeah, it has to be a pre-season period, right? So you're looking between best case 4 to 6 weeks, where these guys we can get them going and we can really build what we've set forth, especially going into a season where you're going to be playing Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday, as well as domestic competitions. We've got international windows in there as well. So the stress on the players is going to be astronomical. So we need to make sure that they're as resilient and robust as possible from a physical and psychological standpoint. And if we can start to hit that during this period now, when we come into it, they already have the mindset that it's time to go. If we have a short amount of time to ramp them up to be able to play games, then we'll deal with that situation in that short amount of time. Then we'll have to liaise with the coaches and let them know, hey, guys have only been going for 10 days, 2 weeks of our preseason 2, then you need to slow roll some of these guys in and think more about rotation when you're going to be playing guys minutes. So there's so many avenues you can go down, and I don't think there is a one shoe fits all for it. You need to be very specific to the scenario that you're in. And like I said to you when we were chatting off air, that a lot of differences occur here, especially because we're panning across Canada and North America, where different states are generally having their own constraints as to how they're dealing with the virus. Like in New York now, there's complete lockdown. Then on the other hand, in Texas, there's no lockdown, right? So if there's the outbreak is smaller there, does that allow the players to go back and train earlier? So then there's a potential disadvantage. Obviously, that won't happen across the league, but there are different areas that we need to be very mindful of as to how we can deal with this situation.
Yeah, it's a tough one to decide who's in the harder position, isn't it? In terms of you guys going into being at the very start of the season, or over in the UK, like clubs getting towards the end of the season, having these. It's crunch time for a lot of clubs, isn't it? It's they have to go back into performing, but not only just performing, but go straight back into winning games and picking up these vital points. But at the same time, from your point of view, there's the season ahead, isn't there? So this disruption right at the start makes it really tough, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think the only way we really overcome it is we have to do it as a collective, right? We have to do it as a collective, as a industry, and also as a collective organization, that we're all pulling in the same direction for the same goal. We're not working in isolation, going, well, it's like we can't do any football with them, so just let the sports science guys or the S&C guys or the medical guys deal with them now. You need to have that kind of fully rounded approach to it, where we have our coaching staff in and they're regularly talking with players like I said, we have a cognitive and psychological element to dealing with it as well. So we're trying to give them this fully rounded approach to what a normal, somewhat normal week feels like. Where they're having some physical work, bear in mind, there's not a lot of football going on, but if there was a day where we're doing video analysis, then our coaches can jump in and they can talk through the game model, they can talk through tactical outcomes in different situations, especially then leaning on our younger players in our squad where we have academy graduates coming in who need more and more technical development, where coaches can spend time with them now and really refine those decision-making skills in different situations. So like I said, overcoming these challenges, it has to be collective. It can't everyone be working in isolation, and try and focus on the task in hand without too much emotion around it. I know it's a very, very emotional time for everyone globally, and there's a lot more going on in football right now. Taking a step back and kind of looking at that is really, really important, and it definitely puts a lot of things into perspective from my point of view.
No, it does for sure, and that's the way to approach it, isn't it? That it's a bigger issue, and football has to take a back seat right now. But in terms of like your approach going forward, Tom, like, obviously we're hoping that this sort of thing never happens again, but real life is that it potentially could. So taking that into consideration, like, is there any change in approach in terms of working with players? Like, is there any sort of preparation that you put in place for the potential of this happening again?
Yeah, I think it's a great lesson that, if anything, players need to invest a little bit more in their careers and having things around their houses and their apartments where they can rely on and still do some work, right? And I think that kind of tails into, God forbid this situation was to ever happen again, but in the off season, that they can do work and be in their own constraints of their houses or their condos, and not having to rely on public gyms and different things of that nature. So I think it definitely gives a well-rounded look into guys need to invest a little bit more from an equipment standpoint, recovery standpoint, that they can have this stuff readily available to them, and also from a appreciation standpoint of the amount of information, support everybody's having on a daily basis, right? Even from our position, sitting at home on your own all day trying to think up new things, it's difficult, and you kind of rely on that interaction with your peers and players, coaches, medical staff, support staff constantly to try and drive new ideas. So doing things like you're doing with a podcast, and I know there's a lot of Steve Barrett did a great performance seminar last week, and it's fantastic that it puts all of us in a position of, like, we're all on the same page, we're all doing the same thing, we're all striving for the same goals, and 98% of the stuff we do, we all agree upon. It's just that 2% that ends up being, we always seem to be arguing about as practitioners and support staff. So from my perspective, it looks as if, we can do a hell of a lot more together than we can in isolation. And just leaning on people, sharing ideas, calling different practitioners around the world, seeing how they're dealing with it, and hosting podcasts like you do. And I think it's a great way to engage so much more. And we have our players like doing online classes, if it's language classes or cooking classes or listening to podcasts. We have a book club, just putting this stuff out. And we're not saying it's compulsory, but the more things we can kind of layer into our content and our program, hopefully the more everyone will grow and develop as people, and become less reliant on us doing everything for them in the long run. So I think, like I said, it's a much bigger picture than just looking at physical development at this time, and then moving forward, it adds a lot more context to difficult situations.
No, definitely. I think it's been a really fascinating time to see how the sort of industry has pulled together and, like you say, shared information. And I think a lot of that has come from the realization that we do want to pull from other practitioners, but at the same time, it's freed up a lot of time, hasn't it? Time that we don't normally have normally. And that's one thing that we talk about a lot with coaches. And that's what the reasons why we run our network meetings is to get coaches together and give them the opportunity to chat to each other. But at the same time, in season, when you guys with the travel that you're doing, it makes it even tougher because obviously we've got maybe a few hours on the longest journey of the season, but you guys are talking. I mean, it's a full day of traveling, isn't it, to get from one side to the other?
Yeah.
So the issues of time are sort of taken away at this time. So it's great to see everyone pulling together and getting these discussions going. Like you say, Steve holding the seminar, but I know there's loads of like WhatsApp groups going on, Zoom calls going on, and it's great to see, isn't it?
Yeah, it's fantastic, and long as should it continue. Like we have a call with all the MLS, S&C coaches, sports scientists every week. It's a Zoom call. We have pretty much everyone across the league on, and it's a great way just to interact and trying to get an idea of what people are doing, how we can get better, can we collectively change anything moving forward as a league and making the league grow. How do we grow performance departments? So it's great. It's great for the industry, and like I said, I hope it continues.
No, definitely, I definitely echo that, mate, without doubt. Tom, this has been great. I think there's been some top discussion on that. Where's the best place if people have got questions, they want to reach out? Where's the best place to do that?
Probably through my social media, my Twitter account. I honestly don't remember what it is ever, but I can share with you. I think it's at Williams26Tom. There we go. I can look that up.
No, that's awesome, mate. That's great. And then you're happy for people to reach out if they've got any questions or want any advice or anything like that?
Yeah, 100%. Like I said, the more we can talk and answer questions between us as a collective, it's great. So yeah, I'm into that.
Awesome, mate. Well, thanks a lot for your time. Thanks for coming on and sharing that. I think it's great to get a perspective from a different league and facing some different challenges over there. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll get a better picture of what's going on in the next sort of few weeks. But yeah, I really appreciate your time.
No problem. I appreciate you having me on. I've really enjoyed talking about some of the things that we're doing here. And I hope that's